Hi, I'm your host Eudora, and today we bring you the Matrix Expert webinar to provide you with expert advice and tips to help you stay on top of your study goals. Before we begin, let's meet today's expert. Today we'll be joined by Mr. Marcus Khoudair, English teacher at Matrix, with expert advice on high school English success. For this webinar, we recommend you have a pen and paper on hand to jot down our tips. Now that you're ready, let's get into the webinar.
Hi, my name is Marcus Khoudair. I've been teaching English at Matrix Education for 4 years, and I started tutoring here in 2015. I just completed my Master of Screenwriting at the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, so I'm still a student too. But now that my course is over, I'll be trying to establish myself in the film and in the education sectors. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of listening, similar to what I say you'd be doing right now in high school as an English student. So thank you for making this time for yourself. Although this webinar will cover a lot of ground, I will guide you through it step by step. In order, we will consider why speeches are difficult for anyone to present, define what an effective speech is and what it requires from you, practice a simple exercise for calm and focus, analyze the techniques and methods that I am using in this speech right now, and explore how Matrix can assist you to most efficiently use your time when presenting and writing a speech in high school English. I encourage you to have writing materials alongside you: pens, pencils, highlighters, paper. Later in the webinar, they're going to come in handy. If you are watching this, you probably have a lot to do. You might be working towards several goals at once. This means that you have a lot to think about, and thinking takes more time. We also need to regularly speak with those around us, family, friends, teachers. And when we are being spoken to, we are still often thinking, often about what the person is saying to us, or about what to say next, or about someone who has just walked past, or about something on our phones, or about being bored, or about eating. Therefore, it is very likely that for at least some of the day, you have multiple thoughts hovering around in your head all at once, competing for attention. When we are speaking, we are forced to say one word at a time. That's all a speech is, one word after another. If you think about it like that, it sounds simple, and yet public speaking or presenting a speech is one of the top fears for people across the world. The fear of public speaking cuts through every culture. It can affect people younger than you, your age, my age, and older, basically everyone. Why? As a rule, we tend to get nervous when we have to accomplish something that we don't usually have to do or think about doing. For example, it is possible that the world's greatest tennis player might feel more nervous about a speech after their match than they would about the actual match itself. Conversely, a person who presents speeches all the time might feel less nervous speaking to a crowd as one big group than they would about meeting individuals from the crowd one-on-one afterwards. Both of these hypothetical scenarios demonstrate how, on a deeper level, we are afraid of the same things. Psychotherapist Amy Morin identifies 10 fears that all humans have. The 10 that they have the most: change, loneliness, failure, rejection, uncertainty, something bad happening, getting hurt, being judged, inadequacy, and loss of freedom. A speech can trigger any one of these or all of them. On the other hand, maybe for you it doesn't. The combinations for what we feel fearful about or confident in are limitless because we all have different experiences and personalities. However, in general, it is common for high school students to feel unenthusiastic about writing and presenting speeches. Unenthusiastic can mean, I'll do this speech if I have to. It can also mean, I really don't want to do this stupid speech, or even this is why I hate English. For all the time you spend in Year 7, Year 8, Year 9, Year 10, Year 11 and Year 12, across all your subjects, you're probably writing and presenting speeches about 0.01% of the time. So if in some way you are sort of kinda unsure about speeches, well, that would be normal and expected. Writing and presenting a speech is not easy. It involves many steps and processes, which gets tricky because it means more work on top of everything else you're already doing for your other subjects, and it gets even trickier because everyone approaches these steps and processes in their own way. So one day before your speech is due, you'll be like, oh, I didn't put that in my speech. Did you put that in your speech? Do we have to have that in our speeches? How many words are there in your speech? My teacher marks differently to your teacher, and so on. Let's cut through it all. To present a speech effectively, you know and respect your topic, know and respect your audience, engage their interest and sustain their attention, offer a personal perspective that they can follow, deepen or argue this perspective over the course of your speech, and learn about yourself whilst writing and presenting your speech. Sounds like a lot. Fortunately for us, there are very old, established, tried and tested, everybody knows them, Googleable tools that you can use to present a speech effectively. These are the sorts of tools that Matrix students learn, practice learning, and receive ongoing feedback on using in some of our English courses. I have used 20 of them in the last few minutes. For the rest of this webinar, I'm going to run through what they are one by one. Before we jump into that, let's give ourselves permission to stop for a second and just bring it all back down a bit. I've given you a lot to think about already, and there's more on the way. So whether you are standing or sitting, I invite you to shift your focus to your breathing. School needs brain, and brain needs oxygen. If it helps, rest your hand on your lower stomach. Breathe out slowly through your mouth, almost like you're blowing out a candle. Until all the oxygen has left your body. Then breathe in through your nose, letting air fill your stomach where your hand rests. Now close your eyes if it feels comfortable and breathe in and out like this 2 more times. All right, I'm good. I do breathing exercises like that before every speech I have to give and every English class I teach at Matrix. No joke. It gets me out of my head and grounds me back in my body. I had a stutter when I was growing up. Sometimes it comes back. When it does, I try to get back to breathing. I started doing this in school. I remember in Year 8, 2008, for me, we all had to present speeches in English about this fantasy novel in which the main character goes back in time to Shakespearean England. As a side comment, I didn't enjoy a single page of that novel, probably why I remember this so vividly. Anyway, my friend went first and he spent his entire speech rocking side to side on his feet. Left foot, good morning teacher. Right foot and fellow students. Left foot, William Shakespeare. Right foot, why do we still study some old dead guy? I knew he was nervous, it showed in his body language. Then I realized that I was nervous because I could see my name on the board as next in line to present. So I put my palm cards under my pencil case and I tried to focus on just my breathing. It helped, and it still does. What I just did is give you an anecdote. I've now used 24 techniques and methods in this webinar. The same skills and techniques that Matrix English students learn in their classes and workshops and read on our Matrix blog. Whenever you get a chance, check out the following articles and you'll see what I mean. How to ace oral presentations, how to prepare a multimodal presentation, and 5 must-haves for a perfect speech. So before we rack up any more, we're going now to work backwards through this speech to analyze how I have presented it and whether or not I have presented it effectively. If you're still watching, that's a good sign so far. I'm doing well, I think. Let's go before I stuff it up. So take out your paper or book or something that you can write on that isn't your hand or your arm or the desk or your phone or computer. On this occasion, we work by hand. That is an order. Split your page into 2 columns, titled Techniques, the other titled Methods. You may also take notes across 2 pages if you wish, whatever works for you. An anecdote. It's a short and often personal account about a real experience that reveals insights into the larger topic at hand. That is its purpose. It is a technique. I offered you an anecdote, and it's not made up, it was real, about the time in high school when I first began incorporating breath exercises into my preparation for presenting speeches. I was descriptive. I tried to tell it like a story, not like a boring and then recount. So why would I have chosen that point in this webinar to include an anecdote? I've been speaking for quite a while. You've been listening to me. Why? Well, you know I'm an English teacher. You know I teach at Matrix. But what if you didn't know anything about me? Would you give a random stranger so much of your valuable energy? If you've never eaten a particular food and it was held right in front of you and you didn't recognize it, would you eat it straight away? If you've never been to a particular place, would you know your way around straight away? The principles of familiarity and intimacy distinguish a high school English speech from a high school English essay. In a speech, your audience wants to know who you are because you are standing right in front of them. If they know something about you, they will more likely recognize your connection to what you are talking about and therefore think you are better positioned to speak about it. An anecdote can be a good way to begin a speech. For this reason, it can also be a good way to recapture the attention of your viewer midway through a speech, which is how I tried to use it. You've just done a breathing exercise. Why? Because I have found that it helps me to prepare for speeches, and now I'll show you through memory how I know that. In this way, anecdotes are strongly related to ethos. Ethos. It's one of 3 methods of persuasion defined by Aristotle over 2,000 years ago. In Greek, it means custom or character. When presenting a speech, if you appeal to ethos, you are attempting to persuade your audience by getting them to trust you. You aim to represent yourself in a reputable and credible way. Reconsider this part of the webinar a little earlier than my anecdote when I introduced the idea of old established speech techniques and methods. Quote, I have used 20 of them in the last few minutes, and for the rest of this webinar, I will run through what they all are one by one. Here, I use pause. Pause is a technique. That's 3. I use it in several places to emphasize the specific action I have taken in structuring this speech. This presents me as someone who is aware of my choices and capable of methodically, clearly explaining them to you. Pause. Consider the sentence right after. Quote. Before we jump into that, let's give ourselves permission to stop for a second and bring it all back down a bit. Here, I use 2 techniques, inclusive language and colloquial expression. That's 4 and 5. I refer to we and ourselves in a casual way, which means that you and I are not separated, but that we share a common need. And that need is not expressed formally or stiffly, it is expressed colloquially, conversationally. We need to bring it all back down a bit. In other words, find calm and focus. This presents me as someone who is sensitive to you, who respects you, and who wants you to be able to sustain your engagement, which I do. In both of these sentences, I have tried to persuade you by appealing to ethos. The techniques of pause, inclusive language, and colloquial expression support my method of persuasion, which is selling my reputation and credibility to you as a competent speaker who is worthy of your time. Through my anecdote, I presented myself to you as a former student who has been in your shoes, reflected on what that was like, and learned from it. Now, if you were presenting a speech in which you had to analyze a sonnet or a play by Shakespeare, maybe you wouldn't need to present yourself in such a way. But maybe you could speak about what part of the sonnet or monologue affected you the most and why. You would be presenting yourself as a credible speaker on the topic of Shakespearean analysis. That would be ethos as well. While you can view ethos as a technique, it is more accurate to think of it as an effect on the audience, because ethos is caused by verbal choices being made by the orator of a speech. Let's go back further into the webinar. Reconsider these sentences that I said. Quote, to present a speech effectively, you know and respect your topic, know and respect your audience, engage their interest and sustain their attention, offer a personal perspective that they can follow, deepen or argue this perspective over the course of your speech, and learn about yourself whilst writing and presenting your speech. Sounds like a lot. End quote. Modality, on its own, is not a technique. Like tone or register or mood or atmosphere, you need to include an adjective or describing word in front of the word in order to identify the technique fully. Modality can be low, high, or medium. When you speak in low modality, you show less certainty. There are occasions in a speech where low modality can be useful. For instance, if you wish to give your audience subtle hints, or if you are genuinely conflicted about an idea. When you speak in high modality, as I did in that part of the webinar, you show more certainty. I didn't say, to present a speech effectively you could, or apparently presenting an effective speech is. No, I stated with directness, to present a speech effectively you know and respect your topic, and so on. There is no room for wavering, there are only actions. High modality is not the only technique I used in these sentences. Altogether, they constitute listing. Each entry in the list is an imperative statement that issues an important instruction to you. Every statement is expressed in as few words as possible. There is no unnecessary waffle. This is concision. The first two entries in the list, know and respect your topic, and know and respect your audience, are together an example of parallelism for their close grammatical alignment. Like rhyme and meter in a song, this makes both sentences stand out and easier to recall. Finally, when I say, sounds like a lot, that is truncation, a shorter sentence for impact after a long, drawn-out, complex series of ideas. So many techniques. Now, you might argue that still only counts as one example, to which I would rebut, yes, it is just one example, but in a speech, I can use multiple rhetorical or speech techniques at once to convey my point. Argument over. That bumps up my tally to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 techniques. Somebody stop me! So, what can we take away from such a concentration of speech techniques? That, by the way, was a rhetorical question, and that makes 12. Booyah! We can take away a vital structural note about speeches in relation to essays. You do not write an effective speech by writing an essay and then by reading it aloud. You don't. The written word, when it is written to be read silently, like an essay, is very different from the written word when it is written to be performed aloud. You know that speech you have to write analysing that Shakespearean text? Your sentences should not sound like essay sentences. If the marking criteria of your speech requires you to be analytical, you still must provide evidence and discuss it as you would in an essay with the modality of an essay, but you are talking. So talk. For example, an essay sentence could sound like, Shakespeare's use of technique in quoted example shows us that effect. In contrast, the same sentiment, exactly the same sentiment in a speech could be expressed in the following way. Quoted example. So what is Shakespeare doing here? The master is using a technique. And at first it felt powerful to me, but I didn't really know why. I've thought about it since. It, effect. Now the same could be said for next quoted example. So though that speech version of that analytical sentiment was longer than the essay version of the same thing, I read it at a naturally quick pace and was also able to piggyback a second example onto the first. This is what we are aiming for and what we teach matrix students. This style of expression, this comprehension and this analysis delivered less like written sentences and more like spoken conversation. See my repetition of this? That's speech technique 13. Okay, I'm cheating now. But I'm passionate, guilty of being passionate about expression. By the way, in Year 10 English, we have a dedicated term course just on speeches, so put that in your calendar. Back to the earlier parts of this webinar. Pathos. Pathos. It's the second method of 3 methods of persuasion that we are covering in this webinar. The first, remember, was ethos. Ethos. Aristotle also gave us pathos. It translates to suffering or experience. When presenting a speech, if you appeal to pathos, you are attempting to persuade your audience by making them feel a particular emotion. Think of the words empathy, sympathy, pathetic, all words I have a personal relationship with. Now, consider this part of my speech from even earlier in the webinar. Quote, writing and presenting a speech is not easy. It involves many steps and processes, which gets tricky because it means more work on top of everything else you're doing for all your other subjects, and gets even trickier because everyone approaches these steps and processes in their own way. So in these sentences, I set up a problem. It makes you feel a certain way. Ideally, I want you to feel apprehensive or intimidated or even recognized because you probably have experienced that. But crucially, I want you to feel curious about finding a solution. And that solution, drum roll, is this entire presentation. A speech can be very persuasive if you convince your audience that they have a problem and that you can solve it. This is unfortunately how all advertising works. And by extension, many political speeches. Sometimes it is clear, sometimes it is subtle. But how about that speech that you have to present in English? What is the problem that you will be providing a solution for? Conveniently for you, the problem is always the question that you are answering. For every assessment task, the problem is unique because the given question is new. Perhaps at some point at school, you will be required to present a speech that does not analyze a text, but instead offers a very personal view or discusses a topic in more of an exploratory, reflective way. Pathos will be powerful then. Strive to make your audience feel, especially if it is about something that gives you feeling. But how did I achieve pathos in those 2 sentences I just reminded you about? Okay. The first sentence was short and stated the problem. The second sentence was long and described the problem. This technique is dynamic or varied syntax, sentence structure. One short, one long, keeps it fresh. I use the word tricky and trickier to claim the problem gets increasingly difficult for you and therefore should evoke increasingly extreme emotions in you. This technique is escalation. To connect it, I use the word because twice. This technique is basic language of cause and effect, and also repetition. Now I've repeated the technique of repetition twice. That itself is repetition. That itself is repetition. Finally, in that same quote, I did something that I've been doing throughout this webinar. I addressed you directly. More work on top of everything else you're doing for your other subjects. What should you feel? Oh, he gets me. He sees me. I feel seen. That's dynamic syntax, escalation, language of cause and effect, and direct address. That's 15, 16, 17, 18. I think it's time to put us all out of our misery and get to that third and final method of persuasion. When I was a wee lad in primary school, I loved Yu-Gi-Oh! And everyone in my school was obsessed with buying the cards from tobacconists in the search for one of the 3 Egyptian god cards: Slifer the Sky Dragon, which I had, Obelisk the Tormentor, and the Winged Dragon of Ra. Now I'm old and boring and I no longer play any games, but I do actually amuse myself by thinking of Ethos, Pathos, and Logos as 3 ancient Greek gods who each have a different power over us. Ethos is the stealthy god that you cannot see, who secretly manipulates you to do its bidding. Pathos is the angry, violent, giant god who subjects you to pain if you don't join its side. And Logos is the all-seeing crystal ball god who shows you what is happening all around you. Quick tip, this is how I make English fun to do on my own, invent little stories to help me remember essential information. Back to the webinar. Even further back, we're nearly back at the beginning, so where's the Logos and what is it? Let's reconsider this chunk of my speech. Quote, as a rule, we tend to get nervous when we have to accomplish something that we don't usually have to do or think about doing. That technique is generalization. 19. Quote, for example, it is possible that the world's greatest tennis player might feel more nervous about a speech after their match than they would about the actual match itself. That technique is a hypothetical. 20. Conversely, a person who presents speeches all the time might feel less nervous speaking to a crowd as one big group than they would about meeting individuals from the crowd one-on-one afterwards. That technique is juxtaposition. 21. Both of these hypothetical scenarios demonstrate how, on a deeper level, we are afraid of the same things. Psychotherapist Amy Morin identifies 10 fears that all humans have most: change, loneliness, failure, rejection, uncertainty, something bad happening, getting hurt, being judged, inadequacy, and loss of freedom. And that technique is a real-world reference. 22. And it appeals to Aristotle's method of persuasion known as logos. Logos means word or reason. When presenting a speech, if you appeal to logos, you are attempting to persuade your audience based on reason, demonstration, factual information, data, statistics, all up logic. Logos. It seems more objective, but it still is subjective because you are the one who is putting it together and leaving out other things. I'd also argue there is ethos here too, because I am citing a credible source. So presenting myself, therefore, as well-researched. And I'm appealing to pathos because I'm getting at the emotions that you might feel when confronted with delivering a speech in front of your class, let alone in front of your friends or in front of others who you might not necessarily like. In high school, logos is the foundation of any analytical argument. You may have heard, you can make up anything in English. That's silly. In English, we strive to form plausible, subjective interpretations. We do this by reading texts, sitting with them, comprehending or investigating what they might mean, and then attempting to express our thoughts honestly and clearly to others. All of this is a logical continuum. Again, back to how I began this speech. All of that takes time. English takes time. Poetry, it takes so much time. It's frustrating. You just want to get it straight away. You want to do it straight away so you can move on to all your other work. But English requires you to think and rethink. And in the moment, that doesn't really seem very productive. How I began the speech, that gives me my final 2 techniques. In 5 simple points, I outlined what this speech would include. Practical, that's 23, outlining. And finally, or firstly, I introduced myself. Necessary, 24, introduction. 24, confession. A lot of those techniques, I got a lot of them from the Matrix blog, article, The Essential Guide to English Techniques. So it's good to get that off my chest. Thank you for making it this far into the webinar. To celebrate, I'm going to speak even more. The focus of this final part will be on English workshops. At Matrix, across English, maths, and science, you sit a term of weekly classes to a specific topic for that term. Speeches, as I said before, is one of the specific topics undertaken in Year 10 English. This course prepares students for presentations in our Year 11 Common Module course. So the courses work together. I've taught them both. It's a beautiful family. Additionally to those weekly classes, you have the option of booking a one-on-one English workshop with a Matrix tutor. These workshops run for an hour each. You can book once a fortnight, and your tutor can book you in for consecutive weeks if you have ongoing work to complete. Like I said earlier, I started at Matrix as an English tutor. I tutored for several years. I know the value of workshops in maximizing your time as a student, guiding and focusing your efforts, giving you a mentor, and, this is so important, empowering you to feel more comfortable and confident with offering your work to someone else. In a space that does not demand perfection, but only encourages progression. This is what English workshops at Matrix do. It's not about being perfect. It's about progressing at your own pace. Tutors don't do the work for you. They help you do the work to the best of your ability. You also note that throughout this speech, I have maintained as much eye contact as I can, maintained upright posture, used hand gestures and body language to naturally complement my words. And I varied the pace and the pitch of my voice depending on the meaning of those words. These are all critical to the effective presentation of a speech, but you may not get much supervised time in your classes to individually and deeply develop your capacity to do this. You can in an English workshop. So, if you're a Matrix student, I encourage you to book a workshop in with your tutor and ask them to give you a speech assessment with marking criteria. And if you're not a Matrix student, don't ever hesitate to reach out. We're really very friendly. Okay, now, 12 steps. Here they are, a process for writing and presenting an analytical speech, which you can follow with your tutor over several one-on-one workshops. 1. Unpack the question, or decipher its directive term and key terms. 2. Brainstorm immediate reactions that you have to the question and possible ideas or responses. 3. Investigate or return to the given text. 4. Select relevant examples from that text. Weigh them up. 5. Consider how those examples might be used to support an argument that answers the question that you've been given. 6. Determine your main argument for that question. 7. Plan your speech. 8. Draft your speech. 9. Time and record your speech. 10. Watch the recording. Note your physicality. Note your voice. 11. Proofread your speech. And 12. Retime and re-record your speech. I challenge you to do this for yourself. Tell them that Marcus sent you. It's really awesome that you've listened to this. I appreciate your time and attention. Give yourself some time now to rest so you can come back restored, refreshed, and energized. Bye.
Thank you for attending this Matrix Expert webinar. We hope you apply our advice to improve your study practice. For more detailed content like this, click the link above to visit the Matrix Education blog, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. See you soon!